The light type to me is part of what I call the trifecta of fan-made types. These are the three most common types that I always see in Pokemon fan games or that people want added into the Pokemon world. These are sound, which I've already covered in a video, light, which this video is about, and some sort of space or cosmic type, which I'm going to cover later on in a different video. Similar to my opinions on the sound type, I don't really like the idea of a light type existing in Pokemon for two main reasons. Number one is that I feel as though the light type has come too late in the Pokemon world, and now it would really be stepping on the toes of other types. The second reason is that I feel as though light would be much better suited to be a different type of mechanic in the Pokemon world, and I'm going to get onto that later. Light already exists as a type. If you think of light as just being the counterpart to dark, then we already have it. It's called the fairy type. Pokemon's dark type doesn't just represent the absence of physical light, it represents evilness and underhandedness. This is why Pokemon like Scrafty or Mabosstiff are dark type, not because they're related to shadows. Shadows are much more of a ghost type concept in the Pokemon world, but more because these guys are bad guys. They represent evil things. They're gangsters, both of them. In contrast to this, the fairy type represents purity and goodness, while dark is grungy and cool. Fairy is a very happy and very cutesy type. Fairy kind of does everything that you'd want a light type to do. So what I'm trying to say here is that when people ask for the light type, we already have a light type. We just don't call it the light type. Fairy does everything that a light type should do. It's just given a more flavorful name. Well, in terms of physical light, as in just brightness, I'll get onto that. This second argument is very similar to the points that I made around sound. However, sound is kind of already implemented across the Pokemon world in this way, so I'm going to add some ways in which I think maybe light could be implemented. One of the reasons why I don't think actual physical light can be implemented is because light moves can be found all across the Pokemon world. If you were to make a light type out of moves that we already have, you'd probably want moves like Signal Beam, Solar Beam, Aurora Beam, Flash Cannon, Photon Geyser, Mirror Shot, Dazzling Gleam, and Moonblast. If you were to change all of these moves, I'd say that you'd lose a lot of the characteristics of these moves, and especially from the types that they come from. Think about it, moves like Dazzling Gleam and Moonblast and Flash Cannon are typically the main special stab for these types, so taking these away would really weaken these types. You also have the issue that now all of these moves become essentially very similar and competing with each other, which again, I just think ruins a lot of the fun because you would pretty much always choose Moonblast in this scenario. Light would be much better as a move property. Move properties are essentially extra types that are attached to moves and not Pokemon. So think of punching moves, slashing moves, or as I mentioned in the last video, sound-based moves. Sound actually already has this implemented, but light doesn't. If you're gonna do this, I think that you should add in some other features that work alongside the new concept of light-based moves. The obvious one is Illuminate, which really could work like Punk Rock. Just flat out buffs all light-based moves. I also feel as though Solar Power could work if it raised your special attack when you're hit by one of these moves. You don't get an immunity with it, because I like the idea that Solar Power is kind of a double-edged ability, but I feel as though it would add an extra factor to think into. Clear Body could also be a great ability that provides an immunity to this. However, a lot of really good Pokemon get this ability, so maybe I'd have to think of a different ability for it, because Dragapult being immune to Moonblast would be quite powerful. Also, I'm not 100% sure that Clear Body works thematically, because I don't really know what the ability is meant to be. Like, I looked at some of the Pokemon that have Clear Body, and some of them, like Dragapult, Tentacruel, they make sense. They have kind of semi-transparent or translucent bodies, but then Garganacl and Metagross, clearly don't. Garganacle's as opaque as you're getting, so I don't really know how he gets that ability. Is it meant to be like they're see-through, or if anybody has an idea, because I tried looking it up and I don't really understand what the concept behind the idea was. Back onto light type, there's also a few items that I think could work well with them. For one, I'd like to think a magnifying glass could be a good way to give it a little power boost. Not a massive power boost, maybe like a 1.2 or 1.3, but that'd just be an interesting way to kind of implement that. You could also have a torch, which works similar to a throat spray. All of these moves are special, so that would work already. Finally, I'd also want to make it so that all sound and light-based moves wake up sleeping Pokemon, because I just think that'd be a really interesting mechanic to add into the game and just something else that you have to think about. So whilst I have gone over the reasons why I don't like the light type, I feel as though it could be quite a good balancing option. The types that I want it to hit strong against, I think that the obvious options are dark and the ghost type. These are two above average types, so I think it would work quite well to give these two new weaknesses. In terms of who light would hit not very effective against, fire and grass. Grass, obviously, because they absorb light. I don't think that they should get an immunity because they're a starter type, and I feel as though that would just feel wrong. And fire, obviously, because, well, fire produces light, so they're pretty used to it already. You could also add in ice here, just because ice is white and that reflects light. It's a bit of a stretch, but ice needs the defensive buffs. For light types' new weaknesses, I'd like to see grass and dark. Grass would absolutely love the new defensive buff that it gets, and I think it'd be really interesting to have that kind of reciprocal relationship between light and dark, where both of them are super effective against each other. We don't have that currently in the Pokemon world, unless you count Dragon and Ghost being super effective against themselves, but I don't. As for resistances, I'd probably give it a resistance to fire, itself, and water. This is again just because the kind of fire and light having to exist together. The water resistance is really more based on the idea of deep sea creatures not being able to come into the light and being really sensitive to that, so they would struggle there. In total, I feel as though light missed its opportunity. We could have had it as a standalone type if it came in before Generation 6, but now with the introduction of Fairy type, it would just feel as though it's in a weird in-between state. Like I said, I feel as though the logical evolution of the light type is for it to become a move category and not a fully fledged type. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope that I've earned a like or a subscribe. What are your opinions on the type?